Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Anthony Salas, and on behalf of the American Marketing Association, I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast sponsored by Nexis and titled Outthink, Outsmart, Outperform with Competitive Intelligence. As part of our continuing efforts to be the most relevant force and voice shaping marketing around the world, the AMA offers a variety of resources, training, and tools to enhance lifelong learning and provide you with valuable information and connections. So at your convenience, please do go visit ama.org, where you can click through the links to various resources. You can also see the full list of our upcoming events that are taking place both in person and online. Before starting today's presentation, just a few quick housekeeping items for you. We are recording the full presentation and we'll make it available to you very soon after, so look for that coming your way. If you can join us today on Twitter, we would appreciate your engagement at #WinWithCI. So feel free to send out some tweets as the presentation goes on. And if you have questions, please use the chat feature that you see there to the left of your screen. Any technical questions you might have, you can enter in that area and we'll get to those as quickly as possible. Content related questions, we do encourage you to enter those as the presentation goes on. We will add those to our list of questions that we'll be addressing at the end of the formal presentation. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker joining us today. We're being joined by Seena Sharp, who is an author and managing director of Sharp Market Intelligence. And you know you're hearing from the expert when a major business publisher commissions the author. John Wiley asked our presenter to write Competitive Intelligence Advantage: How to Minimize Risk, Avoid Surprises, and Grow Your Business in a Changing World. It's received more than 70 5-star ratings on Amazon, significantly more than any other CI book, and it's used in MBA courses globally. Seena is a pioneer in competitive intelligence, establishing one of the first firms in the U.S. more than 30 years ago, Sharp Market Intelligence. The company is known for their expertise in uncovering pragmatic, unknown, and future-focused input, including market drivers, unknown customers and competitors, and different distribution channels. Clients range from Fortune 500 to lesser-known firms in more than 200 industries globally. And Seena is a fellow of Strategic Competitive Intelligence Professionals. She was inducted into the Hall of Fame from the Association for Strategic Planning, earned her master's degree in mathematics from New York University, and serves on the board for Red Planet Ventures. Get ready to learn about delivering a competitive advantage with competitive intelligence. I'm delighted at this point to present Seena Sharp.
Thanks, Anthony. I very much appreciate the introduction, and thank you to LexisNexis also for this opportunity to speak on my absolute favorite topic. And it's a favorite for two reasons. First, from being in this business of competitive intelligence for more than 30 years, we have found that CI never fails to deliver immediate advantage when it's done properly. And we've done this in over 200 industries, so I know it works across the board in B2B, B2C, nonprofit, and educational. And all my comments are equally applicable regardless of the type of business you're in. So I'm really looking for CI to become as mainstream as financial due diligence or any other aspect of the business world. So I hope that some of the comments today will help you to also to encourage others to do it. And secondly, there are many misconceptions about what competitive intelligence is and how to get the most valuable results. And I base that on the topics I see listed at CI conferences and LinkedIn comments and articles about CI. So the purpose today is to deliver a different perspective that will expand or change or challenge your thinking about CI, with the goal to generate better outcomes and successes for your company, your clients, and for you. So what is, the purpose of competitive intelligence is to make good decisions. It's not to have information. It's to have good outcomes the first time. And so as I said, Competitive intelligence is not data or information or software or from the internet or even focused on competitors. These are all components of competitive intelligence, but they are not CI per se. There's a hierarchy of information out there in the world, and it starts off with data, and hopefully it will end in intelligence. So what does that mean? Well, this is just one example of comparing price, which is data, to pricing strategy, which is intelligence. Price is a number. It's discrete and it's specific. It could be one number or it could be several numbers. And it's usually based on cost and what the profit the company wants to make. And you can compare it, the cost of item A to item B to item C, relatively speaking. There may be some differences within it. And you can get that information pretty quickly. That's what price is. Now, if you want to move to intelligence, pricing strategy would be one example of that. So it includes a lot of different details. It's not just a number. It includes many other things that might be part of that strategy. So whether that's bundling or incentives, promotions or dynamic pricing, or if you pay like at a lot of conferences, if you pay sooner, you get the lower price. If it's later, it's a higher price. There might be some benefit to multiple purchases, and there are many other options that a company can choose, as well as combining some of those options. The purpose of a pricing strategy can be, again, many different things. You could be looking to increase sales or market share, and those are two different things. It could be because you want to gain exposure, so maybe you'll have a loss leader pricing. It could be to shut out a new competitor. Many different reasons why you decide on what your pricing and your pricing strategy is. It's difficult to compare pricing strategy from one company to another, and it usually takes weeks or months to do that. Now, each one is valid. There are times when all you need is price, and other times where it's far more valuable and useful to have pricing strategy. But that's a decision to make. And this example applies across the board. I was just using this one, price and pricing strategy, to illustrate the difference between data and intelligence. And I hope that you can see that having a pricing strategy gives much richer results than if you just have price. But there are times when that's all you need, so it's unnecessary to go into and to develop a pricing strategy. So what is competitive intelligence? There seems to be a lot of confusion about it, at least in terms of the way it is executed. So my informal definition of competitive intelligence, it's finding out what you need to know when you're making a decision, and finding out today what you would have learned tomorrow after you made the decision and said, oh, I wish I had only known that. It might have changed my decision. In other words, it's early warning for knowing all the things that are relevant. Now, the formal decision, and this is my formal definition, which again you'll find some other definitions, is that it's knowledge and foreknowledge. Knowledge is the past. Knowledge is good for backgrounds and history and measuring and understanding. It includes data, it includes facts, it includes information. But it cannot tell you, the past cannot tell you what is changing and emerging. That's what foreknowledge is, and that's where the competitive intelligence part comes in. It elevates it. You can't just rely on the past anymore. We have to look at things differently. And looking at today and tomorrow is the only time your company will sell its products or services. So focusing on foreknowledge is far more important than focusing on knowledge and data, and yet that seems to be where the focus is most of the time. So what does that business environment, let me just go back. So it's knowledge and foreknowledge about the entire business environment that results in action. As you'll see, I'm going to get to the entire business environment in a moment. And it results in a decision, some decision that you make. If you don't make a decision, then it's just nice to know. And there are times when all you need to do is just know some information. You don't need to make a decision. But most of the time, it's for the purposes of making a decision. So what is this entire business environment? It includes all the elements that impacts your ability to be successful. As you can see, competitors are in the lower right-hand corner. Competitors are part of the business environment, but they don't dominate. They're not the major part of a business environment. They're not the only part of a business environment. Every business is impacted by many, many other elements. Now, in this case, I've chosen the ones that are most likely to affect most businesses. Again, it applies B2B as well as B2C, nonprofit, and educational institutions. These are all what I would call external factors. This really tells you what the business landscape is all about. Now, you may not need every one of these aspects or segments to include, depending on your product or service and also depending on what the decision that you're making. It also might include other things that are not included here, and that might include things such as security, packaging, design, social media, political factors, whatever is relevant for your specific business. But this is what elevates information to intelligence. And because it includes so many other elements and because there's so much confusion about competitive and competitor intelligence, many of us call this market intelligence, because too often when people hear the term competitive intelligence, they only think of competitors. And yet there are very, very few businesses that are not impacted by many, many other factors. So let me give you some examples of this. There used to be two major newspapers in the Denver region, the Rocky Mountain News and the Denver Post. Then the Rocky Mountain News went out of business. Well, nobody was terribly surprised because many newspapers had gone out of business, so it was just, another one bites the dust. 6 months later, the publisher of the Rocky Mountain News was speaking at an industry conference and discussing what happened with his newspaper. And while he discussed a whole bunch of different items, one thing he said was really quite surprising. He said that when the reporters at the Rocky Mountain News got wind of some new developments, of new information, they were afraid to post it, or rather the editors were a little cautious about posting it on the website because they were very concerned that their competitor, the Denver Post, would steal their information and post it on their website. In short, the Rocky Mountain News was more concerned about their competitor than they were about their customers, their readers. As a result, the Denver Post very often posted information that the Rocky Mountain News had earlier but didn't post, and the Denver Post did that, which made the Denver Post more relevant to the customers. And that's what it's all about. It's getting the customer's business. Remember, business is not a zero-sum game where when one side wins, the other side loses. Now, that may apply to sports, war, and politics, but it doesn't apply in business. In business, there can be many companies that succeed at the same time. And the purpose of your company is to succeed by giving customers what they want to buy. So it's not about competitors. It's about what you need to know in order to be relevant, in order to succeed, in order to make the best decisions. So it's many components. And this is where a company like LexisNexis is very helpful because they can bring to the table input about many other aspects that you might not think about, that you have these very good reporters who realize the connections that are going on with other businesses to your industry, so they help you see the bigger picture. So let me give you some examples. We had a client who made EEG machines, which measures brain trauma. Now, they were a very successful company selling to hospitals and clinics. But then they decided to do something. They decided to make a new strategy that they hadn't done before, which most companies don't do. And they said, I wonder what other market we could sell to. We're selling to hospitals and clinics, but are there other markets? Well, the reality is virtually every single industry or company can sell to multiple markets, but they very rarely think about markets that are different than the ones they're selling to, which may be the prime market, but that doesn't mean they couldn't have a very nice additional business, niche business, or secondary business, but they very rarely think about that. Well, this company did. They came up with a whole list of other markets they could sell to, and they decided on the military. And the way they explained it is that the military has a big problem with brain trauma. It's estimated that 300,000 to 400,000 soldiers have returned from Iraq and Afghanistan with some level of brain trauma. So it's a big problem. Also, the military buys in very large volumes. They pay full price, and they pay their bills. They're the perfect client to have, customer to have. So the company said, yes, we're going to go after the military market. And because it was very different than the usual market they were selling to hospitals and clinics, they decided to hire a separate sales force that would only sell to the military. They decided to create their own training materials and training program to teach these new salespeople how to sell to the military. And they were also going to spend considerable funds designing these beautiful collateral materials, these brochures, etc. Well, they were ready to go out because they were so convinced that this was a no-brainer and this had to be successful, and that's the way most companies believe. They believe it internally, and they go ahead and do it and execute it. But then someone came along who wanted to invest in the business because they were very excited about the fact that this successful company was going to be growing their business by going into a new market. And the investor told the company, said, well, what you're telling me sounds logical, sounds reasonable, I believe in it and everything, but I'd like to see some evidence that what you're telling us will actually come to pass. And that's how we got involved. So we did all the competitive and market intelligence to understand what was happening with the market, how large was it, how was it growing, who was using it, how were they using it, all the usual things that you probably would do. And what we found out was, or rather one of the findings, was that the military would not buy this new product and use it the way the company expected them to use it. And ordinarily, if I was speaking to you, I would ask you why and give me all kinds of reasons as I've gotten in the past. But the reason was that EEG machines emit electrical impulses which signal the location of the soldier to the enemy. That's the worst thing you can do, is to give away your battlefield position. The company, the EEG company, had thought about the military the same way they thought about selling to hospitals and clinics, their current clients. They never considered how this other market could be different. That's what happens most of the time. You think about another business or another customer group or a different distribution channel in a very similar way to what your current experience is. And that's when competitive intelligence is so valuable, because it brings to the table other thinking that you hadn't considered. Now, this company, which was a mid-sized company, would have had a serious problem had they gone out or had they proceeded without knowing that. A large company can afford to make bad decisions. They will just suck it up and they'll just move ahead. Small and medium-sized companies can't afford to make these major mistakes, and they don't have to, because the information is out there if you spend the time and effort to find it. Now, competitive and competitor intelligence may appear to be just a matter of semantics, but I hope that through this example and showing you the puzzle that you can see that understanding your entire industry is far more valuable than understanding just what's going on with your competitors. It shows that you understand how your business, how your industry fits in with business in general, and therefore that's where the opportunities and threats are. And just finally, 2 more points about competitors. Typically, companies overestimate competitors and their strengths, or they underestimate what they can do to find it. So sometimes wargaming doesn't always reveal the reality, but rather the company's internal perceptions. And also companies are far more interested in competitors than customers are. Think about the times that you go out and buy something, whether it's personally or in business. At most, you might think about 1, 2, or 3 other companies or competitors. You rarely think about more than that. And so companies are far more concerned with the whole competitive sphere. So what I'm trying to tell you is that it's far more important to focus on the customers and the marketplace rather than competitors. Let me give you an example. We had a client who was making wrestling equipment. That means singlets, shoes, and headgear. They were doing very, very well. They were from outside the U.S., and they wanted to grow their U.S. segment of the business. Now, they believed they knew the market very well. They had a very good brand name. Sales were constantly growing, but they wanted to grow the business even bigger and faster. And they wanted to know that there weren't any surprises out there, regardless of how confident they were. Well, it turned out there were 2 surprises. One was the presence of female wrestlers. In fact, there are more female wrestlers at the high school level than there are male wrestlers at the college level. Whenever there's something surprising, surprise means change. Surprise equals opportunity. So what's the opportunity here? The girls have to wear the boys' equipment, and it doesn't always fit appropriately. The second surprise for this company was that the greatest growth was among young boys 7 to 14 years old. And they couldn't wear the high school boys' equipment. It didn't fit. So again, this was an opportunity. This was a change and an opportunity for our client to either be first to market with wrestling equipment, clothing that was appropriate for these other 2 groups, or to monitor and wait. And that really depends on the philosophy of your company. Some companies act sooner, some companies act later. This company chose to be the first in the marketplace. And while the numbers weren't that large for either of these groups, they had been growing consistently for more than 5 years. And yet none of the other competitors seemed to be aware of it because they were so busy watching each other rather than looking at the marketplace and what had changed. I like this quote from Sam Walton because basically he's saying, I don't care what products or services I sell. I only want to sell what the customer is willing to buy. And unless you are a company that is looking to do something revolutionary, to really be a major disruptor, your focus needs to be on the customer, what they're buying. And that's always going to change because we live in a changing world. So let me give you 2 more examples to drive this point home, a personal example and one in business. If you were buying a house or renting an apartment and you did competitor intelligence, you were only focusing on competitors, you would compare one unit to another. And you would compare how many bedrooms and the square footage and whether it was an open plan and how big the space around it was and if it had patios or decks or whatever. You would directly compare one to the other. That would be competitor research. But I doubt that any of you ever buys a house or rents an apartment and doesn't include many other factors, such as what is your commute time? If you have kids, how good are the schools? Is it a safe community? Are the things that I like to do nearby? So whether it's movies or parks or sports, what's the flavor of the community? Is it one in which I'll feel comfortable? And what about the neighborhood? What's that like? As well as many other elements. You look at all the things that will impact your ability to be happy there. And that means to be successful because you've made a good decision. It applies equally in business. So let me give you an example of how you can apply that in your company. We had a client that made these frames that support plastic bags that you find mostly in supermarkets and drugstores, although not in California because we've outlawed it in most places. But anyhow, they made the frames for the plastic bags. And they were doing very well, and they wanted to aggressively grow their business. They too believed they knew the industry and the market, but they wanted to make sure there wasn't anything that they weren't aware of. So the first thing we did was a typical industry analysis and all the usual components. But then we looked at 5 other industries that we decided will impact this company's ability to be successful. First looked at the supermarket business because that's where most of the frames were sold. And we looked at and compared paper versus plastic, as well as the sales of them, as well as the storage and shipping costs. And there were significant differences between them. So this was also part of their decision as to which one to promote. You know, some stores will promote paper, others will promote plastic. Then we looked at the packaging business. There was a time when we just used to get plain old paper bags, and then it was plastic bags with handles, then paper bags with handles. And now many stores and many people bring in their own recyclable bags. There will be something else coming down the pike, so we always have to look ahead and see what else is happening in the world of packaging. It may not be for supermarkets. It may be for a different business or industry, but every industry is changing. So how is the packaging industry changing? Then we looked at the plastics business for obvious reasons. We looked at the petroleum market because plastic bags are made from petroleum and those costs are very volatile. And then finally we looked at the environmental arena because many customers were very concerned about the biodegradability of plastic in the landfill. Looking at these 5 other areas, in addition to looking at an industry analysis, gave them a much more accurate and comprehensive understanding of their business, both today as well as in the near future. Remember, the only time you sell is today and tomorrow, so we want to be more focused on what is true today and what is emerging and changing. And then as a result of doing this, there was a bonus for them. And the bonus was they were able to use this information for their marketing and strategic planning. So they already had a lot of additional information rather than just looking at it from the internal perspective. I was at a conference several years ago, and the VP of Global Business Environment for Shell made this comment that I thought really captured what I was trying to say. And they said, most of our decisions that failed because we misunderstood the external world. So what I'm trying to emphasize is that you have to look at and include other factors besides competitors and besides the industry. So giving you some homework. Get your team together. Think about 3 to 5, 7. Think about what are the other areas that impact your industry. And consider why they do, how they do, what that means. Is it a good fit? Think about all the other factors that impact your business. And some will be, they won't all be at the same level. Some will be more important than others. Try to do the same thing with others who work in a different functional area, such as finance or human resources, because people in other aspects of other parts of your company know things, hear things, view your business from a very different prism than you do. So try to engage people from other departments to see what other businesses might impact yours. And to the extent possible, try to reevaluate it every 3 months, every 6 months, as often as you can. Because once you start engaging others to think about it, they will come up with other ideas of what might be, of maybe what you should be monitoring. Peter Drucker really just quantified this, and he said that too many companies make decisions based on internal information, that 90% of the information that on which they make decisions comes from inside the company, and only 10% is about the outside. And he said that should be flipped. So I hope I have given you enough thought to consider moving ahead and including the larger external environment of things that you might not think impact your business. But also, to do really good competitive intelligence, we have to have the right information. It's not just any information. It has to be the right information. And I think of it as being 5 components. Now, 4 of them you know you do well. And there's one that I think is really lacking or minimal and really is the key to giving you an advantage. So the first 4, as I said, I'm sure you're doing this all, know this all. Go through this quickly. The information has to be as current as possible. Sometimes you might have to go back a few more years depending on the source of information. It should be accurate. That means it has to come from several different sources, not blogs. The only time a blog should be part of your consideration is when it comes from somebody who's very highly regarded in your industry or somebody who's very highly regarded in business, unless they say something that triggers an idea of something for you to consider. But it has to be from accurate sources, and so that might be your trade publications. It could be highly regarded business sources, Harvard Business Review or Wall Street Journal, but it has to come from good, solid sources that apply journalistic standards. The information must be relevant. Too often we gather information that dances around the edges, so it seems to be connected or it seems to be important, but it really isn't. It has to be very specific and relevant. Must be objective. Not from the company website, which is not to say that the company website doesn't project what's going on. But remember, the website projects what the company wants you to read and know about the business. So you want it to come from objective sources who don't have a skin in the game. And the area that I find is missing is the area of having sufficient information. In fact, I find that very often the decisions that are made are based on insufficient information. A few years ago, Japan had an enormous earthquake. A tsunami resulted, and as you meant, all the flooding. As a result, their nuclear plant at Fukushima melted, and people were crazed about the thought of a nuclear plant melting down, and everyone started panicking worldwide. In fact, Germany and France announced immediately they were shutting down all their nuclear plants. And those are the major source of energy in those 2 countries. And everyone was talking about the dangers of it. Well, the facts are the death rates from coal and oil are considerably more than the death rates from nuclear energy. This is just one data point. But it shows the importance of just sometimes having one additional data point, one additional piece of information. You can imagine that if you have even more, that it tells you even more of the story. So to say that nuclear energy is dangerous is to say that none of the other energy sources have problems with them. It's just insufficient information. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Los Angeles Times reported that the LA port, which is the largest in the U.S., very important to the U.S. economy, had lower activity. Well, if you just read down in the article, it said it's because the container ships are larger, they're carrying more cargo, and we're actually exporting more goods than ever before. So the headline is really quite misleading because it's only referring to one aspect. This is not unusual. Consider when you look for, when you use information, do you have sufficient information that is not misleading? So let me give you a business example on this. We had a client who was an auto manufacturer, a very large company who had their finance offices located all over the United States. They wanted to consolidate all the offices into a single administrative location. And they selected 4 cities that they were looking at: Los Angeles, Denver, St. Louis, and Dallas. And they wanted to just look at a handful of data points in order to determine which would be the best city for them to move to. They gave us 12 data points that they were interested in. You see some of them on the left, and we looked at all 12. Well, after reviewing them, it was absolutely impossible to make a decision based on that information. They all came out as being equally good in one area or another. So then they added another dozen data points. Now, 2 cities looked a little bit better than 2 other cities, but it really wasn't enough to make a good decision. It was clear they didn't need more data. They needed more information about what's happening, what's going on, both today and tomorrow, because that's when their decision would be implemented. So what we did is we got the major newspaper from each of the 4 cities and just looked at the editorial and the op-ed pages from those major newspapers going back over the past year. We just scanned them. And what we were looking for were the issues and concerns that were going on in those cities. And those issues and concerns were not only important to the city, but also to businesses that would be located there, as well as to employees, both the ones they would be hiring, as well as the ones that they were asking to move from their current city to the new city. So some of the issues and concerns were things like infrastructure, quality of the schools, transportation issues, are there any problems going on, how business friendly is it, the kind of things that the people really care about, and the things that can really be harmful to a business if they don't know about it ahead of time. So when you're doing proper CI, good CI, you're looking to uncover information and input that challenges or disrupts what you already know. Because if you really believe that we live in a changing world, you have to believe that there are changes occurring in every industry, in every entity, in every organization, in every city. And it's just that sometimes we're not aware of it until we do the investigation. So no doubt if you're doing this, you're going to uncover information that your company may not want to hear. It may not be the best thing. It may have to do with a competitor, or it may have to do with customers, but you're going to be uncovering new information that they don't know. So how do you get other people to accept findings that maybe don't go along with what the company believes? Oh, just one last point on this is that, data is very important. I'm not dismissing it. But it's usually not the entire story. Usually you need to have more. So you need more evidence. The more information you have, the more good, solid, current, relevant information, the less the risk is. So let's get back to getting buy-in. To the extent that you can, and in every company or with every client it's going to be different, you want to regularly tell them about these changes that are happening. And very often it's surprising information, or it challenges conventional wisdom, or it's different in some way. It goes against industry beliefs. And this very often is information that is external to the industry. And so that's why they're less likely to know about it or to think about it. People have trouble making the connection between something new and different and what's familiar to them. So to the extent that you can, you want to connect the dots. You want to explain that this is the way the world was yesterday, this is the way it is today, this is what it's going toward. You want to make sure that you help them understand how the story evolves. And it's usually logical and reasonable, and they will understand it and accept it. Even when you're asked just to find information on competitors, try to introduce some information on other factors that are impacting the business to the extent that you can. Repetition, repetition, repetition. We think that once we tell somebody something, they know it. Well, that's not the case. Surveys over dozens and dozens of decades have shown that we have to repeat things constantly. It's not just to our kids we have to tell them all the time to pick up their clothes. This is for all of us. You have to constantly repeat it. It's called the rule of 7. Even if it's not 7, realize that you must repeat it at least 3 or 4 times. So it could be you tell them, Remember when we were in a meeting last week and I told you this, or I sent you an email, or I sent you an article about this 2 weeks ago, 3 months ago, whatever? You have to constantly repeat it, and you have to remind them that you told them about it before. Because if you don't, it will be new information. When you tell them you've told them before, it helps embed it a little bit better in their brains, and they're more likely to remember it. But you must repeat it at least 3, 4, 5 times. Find people in your organization who are influencers. So they may even be in totally different departments, or in departments that you don't think really connect that much with yours. People who are influential are the ones you want to engage with new information, because they will spread the word, they will reinforce what you're saying, and they can be a very important part of getting buy-in for some new thinking. And finally, always remain the outsider. Think like a journalist. Try to stay as objective as possible. And don't accept the conventional wisdom or industry assumptions. Always be the one who's thinking about what's changing, what's disruptive, what's new, what's different. We haven't spoken about analysis, but I just wanted to suggest a few books for doing analysis, because after you have the information, you have to analyze what it's all about. And these two authors, Babette Ben-Susan and Craig Fleischer, are CI experts, and they also write about analysis. So they can write about analysis from the point of view of competitive intelligence, which might be very helpful for you. So my point of today's presentation is to expand your thinking that CI must include external industries, external business, external factors, what else is going on. That it's far more than data or information. That's just the foundation, the entry point. And finally, we must have sufficient input. Always be challenging yourself as to, does this really tell enough of the story, or does this tell all of the story? And the bonus for you will be that you will be alerting decision makers to what they don't know. And we live in a world in which we constantly don't know what's changing and shifting, and that's where competitive intelligence really has an advantage to bring this information to the decision makers, to the company. It also allows you to identify opportunities before your competitors become aware of them and before your company learns about it. Competitive intelligence is an early warning system when done properly. And finally, it's a real advantage to you personally, because it will differentiate and enhance your capabilities, that you will become the go-to person who always seems to know before anybody else does about what's happening. You become the influencer. You become the person that other people want to connect with. So it's great for you personally. So remember, the purpose of competitive intelligence is to make better decisions. And at the heart of better decisions is competitive intelligence. Those are my comments for today. Thank you. And if you have any questions about competitive intelligence or anything I've said or any other aspect of it, here's my contact information. Please don't hesitate to call me. I'd be more than happy to spend some time with you discussing some of these other issues and elements.
All right, Seena, thank you so much. It's great information there. One quick point to your contact information here, as you mentioned. You've got that book that we discussed at the beginning of the presentation. If you are interested in obtaining a copy of that, I just threw into the chat area there. You can click on that link to the Amazon page and see more information about the book and everything that you would need if you're interested. So there is that information there. So really quickly, we're going to move into Q&A here in just a moment, but I just want to remind everyone, if you do still have a question, we've got some time here. Enter it into the chat area there to the left of your screen, and we'll get those added to our list of questions that we're going to be addressing there. Also, before we move into Q&A, just want to point out in regards to our sponsor of this webcast, LexisNexis. As Seena mentioned, a lot of great resources that they have available. So if you are interested in learning more about their resources and how they can work with you, take a moment here and respond to this poll question here. So if you want to learn more about the LexisNexis, have someone contact you, just click on either yes or no there, and we'll record your responses there. So while we have that up, we'll go ahead and move into our first question for you, Seena. And that question is, what macro trends do you think would have the greatest impact in the marketplace?
Okay. Yeah, important question, because trends are changes, and that's happening in every business. It's impacting you to sooner or later or to a bigger or lesser degree, but it is happening. And I would say one of the most important macro changes is concerns millennials. They're roughly 20 to 36 years old today, and as of 2015, they constitute the largest part of the workforce. And in just 10 years, by 2025, they will comprise 75% of the workforce. And the reason this is so important is the millennials are totally different from any previous generation, just as the boomers were. And with the boomers, every new aspect of their lives they moved into, they changed it, they shifted it, and so will the millennials. So it's really important to understand what's going on with the millennials, because it already has started affecting every aspect of business. So for example, the core philosophy of millennials is to make this a better world. And we see this already having an impact in the food business, in many aspects of manufacturing, safer environments, using better materials, fewer chemicals, even on the manufacturing floor. So understanding what's important to millennials is something that needs to be incorporated in every business, even when you think your business has nothing at all to do with millennials or with what they care about. It's all connected.
All right, thank you so much for that. Next question for you is, what sources of information should we be looking at? Things like Gartner, Forrester, and IDC can be very expensive, and not all companies have access to those. So any thoughts on some resources that individuals can access and look at?
Right. Well, many things to do depending on your time and your budget. Your trade publications, absolutely. There are anywhere between 30 and 300 trade publications, magazines, and newsletters for every single industry. Newsletters are a little bit more current because they don't take as much lead time to get out, and they're more specific. So your trade publications, absolutely. Good, solid business publications, whether they're a little bit more macro than yours. So for example, if you have a fast food company, you might want to look at also restaurant news, which includes not only fast foods but other types of restaurants, but also very highly regarded business publications such as the Wall Street Journal or Forbes or Harvard Business Review. You don't have to read everything, but you have to be aware of what's going on. So even a lot of email alerts that just give you the headlines tell you about what's changing and shifting. And then if you are near a business library, a university, very often you can have access to their business databases and find that out. And of course, LexisNexis is, it's a fabulous resource because it's giving you input from many different points of view, from industries that are outside yours as well as the general business world. So that's when you get that external perspective.
All right, thanks for responding to that one. Next question for you is, how do you know when you have sufficient information?
Right. Do we ever really think we have sufficient information? I would say two ways to think about that. One is time. So if you have to have something to somebody by the end of the day or the end of the week, you're limited by the time. The other one is you have to learn to trust your judgment, that have I uncovered some new, insightful, important information. If you're doing competitive intelligence and you're not saying anything new or different, then I would say that's not sufficient. So you may not be able to have the time or the resources to develop everything that's different and changing, but you should have at least a few things in there, and at least that will open up the conversation and keep it going forward, and it will, I think, be far more valuable than just data and information.
All right, thank you. Next question here, good question. How can startups and small businesses get started with CI?
Just number one, being alert. Number two, paying attention to customers. What do they say, especially when they say something you don't like or you don't agree with or you think is weird or strange. And it's not that every customer is correct, but sometimes customers will be a great resource for telling you about a new feature, a new service, something that you are offering that they don't care about. One of the things that I find constantly when we work with companies is what they think is important and what they focus on as a differentiator, the customer doesn't care about. So they're wasting not only their resources, but what they're emphasizing to the customer. So you have to have good relationships with your customers. It can be market research, but it can just be paying attention, whether it's engaging them, talking with them, finding other articles or surveys that have been done about them, but what's going on in the marketplace, as well as what are other things they might be buying and what's important to them about that. So one of the best ways to get started if you're a smaller business is to focus on things that are going on beyond your business. Don't think that everything, that all these sources of insight and opportunities come from within your company. It's very often from outside.
All right, and I think we've got time for one more question here. This one is there a right time to do a deep competitive intelligence analysis, and if so, how frequently should that be done?
Right. Well, I think the key word in that question was deep. So I'd say the more important the question, the more resources, the more money, the more time, the more people it involves, the more important it is that you do it. I mean, as somebody who believes passionately in doing this at some level for almost all decisions, that may not be realistic, but certainly the more important the decision, the more important it is, and the better results, the better decision you will make from doing it. And once you've done it, you need to just, I would say, revisit it on a lesser level, if you will, every 3 to 6 months. Because even though we may not be aware of the changes, there are changes that are happening. And especially pay attention to changes in those industries that are indirectly related to yours. So it could be suppliers, it could be industries that aren't the same as yours, but when people buy one product, they may buy another. So pay attention to changes that are happening there, because they may generate ideas for you to offer something advantageous to customers before other companies do.
All right. Well, Seena, as I said earlier, this has been a great hour of information. And on behalf of the audience, I just want to thank you so much for all of this and for sharing this time with us. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much again to you and LexisNexis. And for all the questions, thanks.
Absolutely. And just a couple of quick reminders to everyone as we conclude our webcast today. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is all being recorded. We are going to be sharing a link to the recording with you, so look for that coming your way shortly. To those of you that joined us on Twitter, we really appreciate your engagement there. There was a lot of good sharing going on. If you weren't able to engage, you can still go post-webcast and engage at #WinWithCI. And here in just a moment, we're going to redirect you to our survey page. If you would, take a moment or two, let us know what you thought of today's presentation, and also let us know what topics you want to see us present on future AMA webcasts. We really try to make sure that we're providing you with the insights that you need to perform your job to the best of your ability. So thank you in advance for helping us out with that. In closing, I want to extend a really big thank you to LexisNexis for sponsoring our webcast, as well as to ReadyTalk for providing the platform that we used. If you'd like to learn more about ReadyTalk and their services, you can go to readytalk.com/AMA. And last, of course, I want to thank all of you in our audience for sharing an hour from your busy day with us. We certainly hope you found this information helpful, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon on another AMA Thought Leader webcast. That does end our presentation for today. Thanks again for joining, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.